One, we're live.
Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of September here in the UK. If you're joining us live, if you're listening to my dulcet tones at any other time, it's not live, so don't call or don't do anything I'm going to suggest about joining in because you'll wake me up. But if it is Wednesday or the equivalent somewhere around the world and you're listening to us live, welcome. It's good to be back. I was away last week, and so they had a rerun. I'm not sure what they showed. What I think some lottery winner, somebody chose a show, so I hope it was informative and helpful. Back live again with a new guest, Robert Teague, who's the headmaster of oh my God, the name of your school has just gone out of my head, Robert.
The Cedar School. Yeah.
Bound to happen, isn't it? Unless you have these things written in front of your face. So, it's great timing to have Robert with us this evening because, of course, schools have just gone back in the UK and in many places around Europe as well. So we've been doing a lot of interviews with the press about the return to school. So fantastic to have Robert here to talk about that, but also talk about Cedars, which is a very unique independent sector school. And we were having a really interesting conversation about your school. So we're going to learn more about it. First, a little bit of what they call furniture, which is I'm going to let you know some of the sort of things that you can do to join in. We're streaming on multiple platforms. And my team are sort of looking out on those platforms for your comments, your thoughts, your suggestions. So please do join us that way, whether you're watching us on Facebook or on our YouTube channel or via Periscope. That'd be great to hear from you. And I hope these days we're on LinkedIn as well. I'm not sure if we've managed to get there yet, but we certainly post the videos on there. It'd be great to have your comments. So do drop us a line in those platforms, or indeed you can give me a call. This is the phone you'll get through to, and it's 07506 319 745. That's +44 if you're calling from outside the UK, +44 7506 319 745. If you don't want to pay carrier charges, use that number and come through on WhatsApp. I'm on WhatsApp, and be lovely to have your comments, thoughts, and we can get you live on the air, which would be great. I'll make you famous. So there you go. Can't ask for more than that. That's enough of that from me. I'll remind you of those things as we go through the show. As I said, we've got Robert Teague. Hello, Robert. It's great.
Hello.
So I'm sort of being very careful here. I'm with the headmaster and just making sure that I'm not in trouble, which is the only other time I've seen headmasters in my life. But I don't think I am tonight. I don't think I'm in trouble tonight, Robert. So welcome. Where are you joining us from this evening?
Croydon.
Croydon, sunny Croydon.
Sunny Croydon, yes, that's right. Not too sunny today, but...
It's south of the river, though. I don't venture there much. I travel a lot, but I don't go south of the river in London all that much. So, so welcome. Really, really, really good to have you on. And also, as a busy teacher with term starting as well, I'm really appreciate the fact that you're making time. Because you must be up to your neck in it with the start of school, you poor thing. So tell us about that. How's it going? How's it going at the beginning of term, this really odd time that we're in?
Yeah, well, it has been a strange time, but it's gone very well so far. We've had a lot to take on board over the last few months.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most schools were open last term, in fact. Initially for key workers children, and then primary schools were open for several year groups from the beginning of June. And then we're a secondary school. We were open from the 15th of June for 2 year groups. So you know, we have been operating in some form, but I mean, tomorrow in our case will be the first time we've had anything approaching a return to, I suppose, what people are calling the new normal. I mean, I hate that phrase, but anyway, so there's been a lot to take on board. I mean, the thrust of the government guidance has been, we've got to be open for all pupils full time, which is great. So that's what we want to do, and we've got to do everything we can really to make things as safe as possible for everybody, and that's really where the challenges lie. But
so what things have you put in place, and what sort of things are you doing just to make
so we've staggered our school day. So we have different start times and end times. We've kept all teaching time, but we've cut some of what we call pastoral time. So, form time and things like that. And that's enabled us to stagger the day. But it's going to, there is a loss in that as well. We've divided the school into what are called bubbles. So in our case, we've split the school into year groups, and we, as far as possible, keep year groups separate. There are some exceptions where it's justifiable for them to mix, but in general, we keep them in those groups. But obviously, within those groups, distancing is going to be very difficult. And that's really the point, that I suppose if we do get any positive tests, then it may be that bubble will have to isolate, but it won't mean that the whole school has to close for a period of time. So
I was going to ask that. I mean, what does happen in the event that somebody sort of
well,
tests?
if we have a positive test, and we've been sent kits as well by the government.
Right.
Although I think they're only really to be used if it's unlikely that someone's going to get a test otherwise. But if we were to have a positive test result, then we contact the local health protection authority and follow their advice. So it may be that they'll say, well, as long as that person is isolating, then just carry on as normal, or they may close a bubble, or but we just have to follow their advice.
Yeah, and you were saying just before the show went up, you've been sort of nicely surprised by the fact that your team, your teachers and assistants, etc., and everybody who's turned up has actually been quite positive about reopening the school, and really just want to get on with it and get on with sort of having a good environment for the kids to come into.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really heartening because I had. I mean, we've got a very committed staff. We're very lucky indeed. But I had thought, well, perhaps some people will be a bit nervous or reluctant to come back. But actually, everybody's been, we've had 100% attendance, and everybody is really excited and positive about being back. So tomorrow we'll have the first pupils back as well. So I'm hoping they'll feel the same. But I mean, I'm optimistic because nobody has contacted me to say, oh, we won't be back, or or even to. I mean, we've obviously sent out information about what measures we're taking, so that parents are informed. But nobody's expressed any concern about that, which again is very encouraging. We've got.
My boy went back on Monday, and he sort of, at the end of the day, he went up to his mum and said, "Mum, thanks for my school. It's great." So, which is fantastic. I mean, that sort of really lifted my heart to hear that he sort of, and I think, kids are looking forward to school. They're genuinely. I mean, it's just been such an odd time, although it's fantastic to have time with your kids and your family and all that sort of stuff. It's been a long time to be at home, and I think most kids are a little bit fed up with it and want to get back to seeing their mates and having fun and get a rest from mum and dad, to be honest. So I'm expecting them all to be quite excited when they come back.
Yeah.
Have you got any particular one of the issues that's come up, and you don't have to, I don't know that it's necessary, but one of the issues that we've been discussing with, because my company does these press releases, and obviously we did a press release about going back to school. And one of the things is just thinking about the sort of emotional well-being of kids, and whether it's back into the curriculum, or is it a focus more on trying to sort of orient the kids and ground them and support them emotionally. What's the sort of what does the pattern for the first few weeks look like for you?
We've thought a lot about this. I mean, I suppose my instinct is that the more we can get back to something approaching normality, the better.
Sure.
And I'm a little bit wary of. I think we have to be prepared for issues for sure. Because we know that many of our pupils will have had very different experiences during the last few months, and some of them would have had. In fact, I know some of them would have had negative experiences. And so I think we have to be very vigilant and supportive. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to give pupils the impression that there should be a problem.
Yeah.
So I certainly won't, when I speak to pupils tomorrow, I won't be saying, you've probably had a really bad time and are traumatized and everything, because I just don't think that's the right approach. So I think we'll try and make things as normal as possible, get them stuck into learning and extracurricular activities and social interaction with their friends, and then just be vigilant for problems as they arrive. And obviously, we're quite fortunate in that we have a lot of there's a lot of support for the pupils in our school. We have something called a tutorial system.
Right.
We're a boys' school, so we have a sister school, which is a girls' school as well. But in our school, every boy has his own tutor, like a mentor, really, with whom he speaks on a one-to-one basis regularly, and that's very powerful because you'll get some children who will feel quite comfortable going up and talking to an adult and so on, but I think many won't. But if you create that space for them, then they will start to be forthcoming and you can help them more.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the idea of getting back to something like normal as quickly as possible is a really important thing. This is not the situation we're in, but as a way of thinking about it, if you think about so children who are in difficult circumstances like war, countries at war, etc. One of the things the sort of childcare agencies do is get schools up and running as soon as possible and just get back to classrooms and teaching and normal everyday school activities. And then you can observe in that context if a child is exhibiting disturbing behaviours or disturbed behaviours. And actually you can see it more clearly in that sort of context because that's what your team are good at. They're good at sort of teaching kids and engaging with them and then spotting if there's problems with that learning and that engagement. And then it sounds like you have a really good system in place for then fielding that and supporting children. But that's very much about the philosophy of your school as well, isn't it? That you when I was talking to you, you have a very, very unique approach, particularly for the independent sector, in terms of looking at education in its broadest context. Do you mind if we talk a little bit about that, about the philosophy of your school and its approach to education and children?
Yeah, it is quite unusual. Pretty much any school, well, I'm sure every school wants to have high academic standards and wants to help its pupils develop personally. But what we do, I suppose what is most distinctive about our school is the relationship we have with parents, and that colours just about everything that happens in the school. And it's really this idea that parents are the first and most important educators of their children. Yeah. So that's if we have a foundational principle, that's it really, and everything else follows on from that.
That's quite an extraordinary statement. So what does that break down to? What do you mean by that in sort of practical terms? And
yeah, well, in practical terms, because I suppose what's difficult for us in a way, it's quite difficult to get this across because all schools nowadays will talk about partnership with parents, and it's something that they value, and it's something we value as well.
I know, but what they mean by that is you'll turn up and tick the boxes and
exactly, yes,
what we ask you to do, and sort of tell us wonderful and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So it tends to mean co-opting parents into the mission of the school, where the mission of the school is understood as that narrow academic achievement, if you like, which obviously is important. What we're trying to do is turn that on its head in a way, and so rather than seeing ourselves as trying to get parents supporting us, we see our role as supportive of parents, and it has a huge number of practical consequences. I suppose the first and most obvious one is that the educational project then becomes something led by parents rather than by the school. So we see every boy in our school as a shared project between us and his parents. And then following on from that, you have to expand your idea of what education is really. So rather than education being what happens at school, the academic and the extracurricular and everything else, that rounded school experience, it becomes the sum of experiences which go to form that young man or young woman.
Right.
And so both in our vision, home and school are working together in their respective spheres, but in very different ways, because these are different environments. So it's not for the school to usurp the role of parents or to make it homely, but we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So, but it brings other things into sharp focus as well, because I've always been. We're very keen on developing character. We see character as important. We want to help that personal development, but I'm very uneasy with the idea of a character school. So we don't describe ourselves as a character school, because I think it muddies the waters a bit, because a school exists for a specific purpose. It's to fulfill those parts of an education which are best fulfilled in a school environment. So it's a distinct purpose from the home. So we see our task as to fulfill that part of an education, but to do it in such a way that takes account of that wider educational project.
Yeah.
So in other words, in practice, what we're trying to do is to help each pupil to grow in virtue, I suppose. So to become, we're trying to take every opportunity that school life provides to help them become, more generous, more hardworking, sincere, all those good personal qualities which parents will want to develop as well. But schools can, if they're not careful, can undermine with the best of intentions, simply not intentionally reinforcing those lessons. So we, for example, over the last couple of days, we've been talking about how we can do that, particularly with new staff, so that we're making sure we're not missing opportunities to help the pupils grow as people.
There's a real sort of internal project. I mean that internal psychological world of the student and the internal emotional world of that student as well, because I guess you can't do that unless you're nurturing a really broad sense of relationship and support. It's interesting because and again, I'm sure there are limits on how you might be able to answer some of my questions, and that's fine. Just tell me if I'm being too nosy. But I guess my experience as a psychological therapist who works with families, I do this a lot, and I also work with. My teams work with independent sector schools as well, and and I'm aware of the sort of pressures that parents will place on schools, particularly in that sector where they're paying fees and stuff like that, and they want results, they want sort of things for their money and all that sort of stuff. And working with those parents, particularly ones that we might describe as more helicopter in their approach, for example, who have a very narrow, almost tunnel vision of what little Johnny or little Jenny has to achieve, and sort of then working with that parent to sort of try and get them to understand something broader than that in terms of the child. I mean, you're taking quite a sort of courageous position if you don't mind me saying, where if you put that sort of, well, I suppose the old liberal philosophy of education, educate the whole child.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, we're very upfront about what we stand for.
Right.
So when we have open days and when parents come round, I mean, I and my colleagues, we're all very open about what the school is and about its distinctive nature, and that will put some parents off. And you know, in a sense, that's probably a good thing in that we wouldn't be what they're looking for. Because I think that partnership between home and school is essential. But the parents we have do want to work with us, and I think value the objectivity that we can bring to their tasks.
Do your boys board with you, or?
No, I mean we have some international pupils who are privately fostered. I mean, normally by families at the school. So they might come for a term. You know, sometimes they'll come for a year. So we have pupils mainly from Spain. We've just started taking some from Hungary.
I know what you mean by privately fostered. Maybe just explain that.
Yeah, sure. So we have links with other schools around the world, most of which actually share the same broad ideas that we have. And so we have some children coming over where they'll lodge with a family at the school, and normally they'll try and match the boys so that they're of similar age and interests, even if possible. And so they'll live with that family for a term or a year, and then come to school as a Cedars pupil for that time, and just follow the normal curriculum. But their standard of English is normally pretty good and good enough to benefit from the immersion in a school environment.
Yeah. But otherwise, your boys turn up, they're day pupils, and they
I mean, I mean, these are really guests, the ones who come from a year. So I mean, our permanent pupils are all day pupils. We're a day school.
And what sort of area? I mean, they're just around London, or is it home counties as well?
Yeah, I suppose we've got a map. We do a map every year showing all the pins, you know, using Google Maps, and then put that on the website normally. I forget what the percentages are, but we have a large percentage who'll live within the borough of Croydon. But then we'll take some from Lambeth, Southwark, Merton. We're starting to get a few more from Bromley. We've had pupils coming from Haringey, Chiswick. Those are the furthest.
Yeah.
We're not getting too many from further south.
Right.
You know, we get some from the southern, I suppose, parts of Croydon, but not really going beyond the Croydon boundary much. I'm not quite sure what that is yet, but.
Right. And how do parents find out about you? I mean, it's sort of, is it word of mouth, or is it, you know, sort of your great marketing team?
It's mostly word of mouth. We've got a fine admissions registrar who is also doing marketing, and she's really making a huge difference. But it is mostly word of mouth, mainly because, I mean, we are quite new, and we'd rather spend the money on improving the school as much as we can than too much marketing.
I was going to ask, how long have you been around as a school?
We opened in September 2013.
Right. Wow.
So I'm just trying to work that out. I think this is the start of our 8th year.
Did you open? Were you there at the opening of the school?
I was. Yes. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Did you help shape this philosophy? Was it very much what you wanted?
The philosophy isn't my own. I mean, we've put, if you like, I suppose, an English spin on it. I mean, I've worked in English schools in the state sector and the independent sector. I'd never worked in a school like this, but I was attracted to the ethos. I mean, we're run by an educational trust, which is called PACT, which stands for Parents, Children, Teachers, and that really reflects the importance of parents in the whole philosophy. And it really comes from, you know, we have a Catholic ethos, although I mean, we're very keen to have a mix of pupils, a mix of faith backgrounds, and that's something that we value. because normally Catholic schools in the state sector, because their admissions policies have to be quite strict, aren't able to do that. I mean, some will have a mix and some won't have a mix, depending on how oversubscribed they are. But it's something that we actually is important to us. We think it benefits everybody. But the philosophy comes from a saint of the 20th century, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, who founded Opus Dei, and his educational ideal really was there was a paper written about it actually in this country, published a few years ago, and the paper neatly sums up the philosophy in 3 words. I mean, the first one is formation, so this idea that we should be forming people and looking not just at their intellectual formation, but their moral, spiritual, social, all these things. And that's why we have, for example, the tutorial system. The other one is family. It's a bit forced. It really is reflecting the fact that we see ourselves as working closely with parents. And the third one is freedom, which is also a difficult one to explain to parents, but it's something that we're very passionate about, and it's something which I suppose during these 7 years, not having had any experience of a school like this at all, it's something I've had to get to grips with, and I feel I've started to understand it more and more, and see the importance of it as time has gone on. But the freedom thing is really central, and it's really
unfortunately.
It appears that Noel is having a slight technical issue. As I'm sure you're well aware. He'll be right back with us in a moment. I'll just, he's just sent me a message saying he's crashed and he's reconnecting. So apologies for the inconvenience. This is where if we were the BBC would have a funny little sign to put up, saying pause for technical difficulties, which is interesting. When did you start being a headmaster out of interest?
2013.
So yeah, when the school opened, right?
Exactly,
You were there when the school opened. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. And what were you doing before then?
I was in a local school called Wallington Boys, which is in Sutton, a neighbouring borough.
Okay, cool. So have you do you work in lots of boys' schools, lots of mixed schools?
I have worked in mixed schools. I've been in boys' schools since 2001.
Did you start your profession in a boys' school out of interest?
No, in a mixed school.
In mixed school. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do you so what are your ideas on mixed schools and sort of single-sex schools? Do you think they're a good thing, bad thing?
I think that a good school is a good school, whether it's mixed or single-sex. I'm not dogmatic about it. I mean, I do think that there are. I think a lot of people don't realise the advantages of single-sex schools, because I think the general perception, and it was my perception as well, was that it was if you're in a mixed school, you're more likely to get distracted.
I couldn't agree more, to be honest. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. And
you get to 16 and things, you start to think differently about things. Let's say that.
I'm sure there's something in that, but I realise now that misses I think that the most important point, which is that particularly if you take it from the point of view of boys. Noel's back, I'll.
The wonder modern technology, if it's a doorbell going, it's various things crashing. We just got to freedom, Robert.
Yes.
And then I freely disappeared on you. You were saying that was the thing that maybe the concept that was in some ways most difficult for you to get your head around. And it's something which is difficult to explain to parents as well, and to teachers for that matter. But I suppose what we mean by freedom is, ultimately we're trying to help people become the best version of themselves, to become the best they can be.
We see that as as our role.
Yeah.
And that is always the result of the exercise of freedom.
Yeah.
Any human greatness is the result of an exercise of freedom. And so we see our task very much as helping people to use their freedom well. So there are many different aspects of that. I mean, I think one of them is that
I mean, because there's a sort of link to sort of a theological, religious sort of connection. Is that linked to the idea of free will, which is sort of very much that Christian notion of we are born with this capacity to make decisions for ourselves, and somehow we need to come to terms with that in some way?
At root, it is, yeah, absolutely. In that, I suppose we would see that we would see our fundamental purpose as love. That we, there's a phrase that John Paul II used to quote a lot. That we find ourselves through making a gift of ourselves. That self-giving love, and love is obviously an exercise of freedom. If it isn't free, it isn't love. So I suppose at root it is that we're actually at a deeper level, we're preparing these people so that they are able to love. And so on one level, I mentioned the virtues before, and I think the virtues can be empowering.
Yeah.
That they enable people to be more effective as human beings. So yes, more effective as students and everything else, but fundamentally more effective as human beings. The virtues can help us to be better friends, to be better members of a family, better members of a society, as well as in workers and everything else. The virtues, if you like, are one side of it. I think another side of it is also dispositions, and it's that. So not just training people to, in a sort of robotic way to be good. We are what we repeatedly do, but also, I suppose, trying to inspire people to want to be good, to want to help others, to want to give themselves, which is a more delicate thing and a more mysterious thing. But it's something we keep at the back of our minds. So to give you some practical examples, we give freedom where we can. Now, we don't give freedom over homework or over attending lessons. I mean, there is one school in this country which does that, which you probably know about. We don't do that. We're pretty strict in that way. But for example, we have a religious service, mass, 3 times a week, and the boys have an absolute free choice over whether to go or not. There are no brownie points for going. There's no disapproval for not going, and there's no pressure to go. It's absolutely free. They don't go, absolutely fine. And that actually changes their dynamic massively. I mean, as somebody who went to a Catholic school, in the 80s, I can remember being corralled into the school hall for these masses and not really being there present mentally or spiritually at the time. So it's very different. And I think another way is trying to take the long view, and also trying to help parents take the long view, so that when things go wrong, because as you know, I mean, sometimes teenage boys will do silly things, and they often won't know why they've done them themselves. They'll make a bad decision, and often this can be very upsetting for parents, because I think, and speaking as a father myself, it's very easy to have a template for how your children are going to be, and this is what they're going to do, and then if something upsets that plan, then the bottom can fall out of your world. And so we try and see these things actually as positive events. We might wish that they hadn't happened in the first place, but if something has gone wrong, we try and work with parents and say, look, we are where we are. What can we do now so that your son looks back on this and thinks, well, thank goodness that happened.
Yeah,
because you learn so much from that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a sort of, something that a psychological process I try and get across to people a lot. Not that we want somebody to have a difficult life experience, but the way you manage a difficult life experience and transform it and learn from it, and then actually allow it to teach you, is a really, really important psychological skill, which is beyond the standard sort of resilience approach. And generally, we teach people resilience, how not to be affected by something, if you like, something negative.
Yeah.
But there are things that happen that are negative and they affect us, and that's the truth. And we can't avoid that. But what we can do is decide what our relationship to that experience is, which is, it seems to me, what you're talking about. What's striking out, and it's interesting having a conversation with you, because it's like, it's not a conversation I'd expect to have with a headmaster or a teacher about education. This is, you know, saying that our primary purpose is to teach our kids how to love. That's, you know, that's not a conversation I've had with many headmasters. It has to be said, I agree with you. I mean, I absolutely 100% agree with you. And sort of, I agree on so many levels, and sort of neurologically, it actually makes sense. It's something that some of the great thinkers and great spiritual thinkers have said. Jesus said it, Buddha said it, etc., etc. These great people have been saying for centuries that the core of the human experience is freedom and love. And it's wonderful to hear you say it. And I think you're right to sort of just check it and go, that doesn't mean we let the kids run around and do anything they want, because that's not fair on children, and it's not right. It's not what you should do. But teaching children how to use the freedom they have responsibly is, to me, a really sensible task, a really sensible core educational task. It surprises me there aren't more schools doing that, because the approach to the fact that we do have freedom often is to try and control somebody and to put rules and boundaries, rather than to teach them how to manage themselves with that freedom appropriately.
Yes, yeah.
And I think I totally agree. I mean, it's sort of, what was it when you came into this philosophy? I mean, obviously, you were saying that you hadn't come from that background. What did you think initially? You must have gone, what on earth? What am I doing?
It did attract me, but my understanding of it, I feel, has grown with experience of seeing it in practice.
I mean, I say that because I'm teasing you slightly, and I know things about you that the audience don't. So I happen to know, for example, that you used to be a copper, and you met. And the idea of a Metropolitan Police officer telling me that their life's purpose is to teach kids how to love is great. I'm thinking, this is fantastic. And I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek. I did a lot of work with police officers in youth offending services. Some of the nicest, kindest, most loving people you're ever going to meet. And these are sort of officers from the streets who'd had a lot of experience around, but they were absolutely lovely and gorgeous and wonderful with these oiks who were hard work.
Yeah.
And they were brilliant with them. So I've known a lot of coppers who are very loving people who would totally agree with this statement. So, but you didn't come straight into teaching. And in fact, you didn't come straight into work, did you? You were maybe one of those people that didn't use their freedom all that wisely originally, possibly, maybe?
I think that's, there's certainly some truth in that.
Right.
I perhaps won't go into detail, but
yeah, because you don't want to hang yourself in this conversation too much.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about how you got to this point. This Robert Teague who sits before me, and I'm finding very intriguing this conversation. What was your journey into all of this?
Well, as you said, I mean, I was in the police. I mean, before that, I'd wanted to join the police, actually, certainly in secondary school. And then I ended up doing quite a few jobs when I was 16, 17.
You left school at 16, didn't you? You didn't.
No. I did do A levels. But I probably spent far too much time working in various jobs than when I should have been studying.
Okay.
And then I joined the police. I came down to London, joined the Met, and I started to be attracted, I suppose, to working with young people, because not that that was my role particularly, but there were a few things which happened where I ended up going into schools. It was in Haringey that I was working, and I remember going into maybe Northumberland Park School and St Thomas More School, so two schools in Tottenham and Wood Green.
I know them well because I live in Stoke Newington, so.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Just up the road from me, so I know that area well.
Yeah, and I suppose the idea really just grew, and so I went into teaching. But then, when I was in teaching, I mean, I ended up as head of maths at a school in Oxford, Magdalen College School in Oxford, which is a really good school, and I was very lucky to it was a great place to learn more about teaching. Actually, fantastic school, and I was there for a few years. And when I was there, I heard about this group called PACT. I read a newspaper article about them, and at the time they only had primary schools. I think they only had one primary school at the time. They were just opening a second one, and I was very intrigued by the article because there was something about it which resonated with me. I'd never heard it before. It was really and I was working in what is a very, very good school, but it was almost making me aware perhaps of another dimension to teaching which I hadn't given enough attention to. So I went to visit Oakwood and was very taken, and so a few years later, I ended up sending my own children there, and then got more and more involved that way. So and then, as I said before,
you have 5 children, don't you?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Which is quite an achievement. So well done.
Thank you.
Managing that, and I think your eldest or your second eldest is off to Madrid, and you're saying
yes. He moved over there yesterday. Yes, that's right.
And so sort of this school that you sent your children to was informed by this PACT approach, I presume.
It was. I mean, yes. I mean that was at the time. I mean that was a primary school, and so they all went there for at least 1 year. One of them had only 1 year there, and then they all went to different secondary schools for various reasons. But they were all too old. We're a boys' school, so my daughters couldn't go there. But they were all too old to go to the Cedars, except my youngest son, who does go to the Cedars. So he's just finished his GCSEs,
right?
And he's starting in the 6th form.
What's it like having his dad as the head in the school?
I do feel a bit sorry for him, but it's the second time this has happened. Because in another school, in the school I was in before this one, my second son was there. Right. And he joined the school at the same time that I did, and I ended up leaving 2 years before he did. So I left when he was in finishing year 11. And I think it depends a lot on the personality of the child. I mean, I would have absolutely hated it, but both of these sons, I think, are okay with it. And I mean, I do ask them about it, and they don't seem too perturbed. Right. But I mean, I try not to embarrass them too much. But,
that's a failed project. Parents are
yeah, I think
not a lot you can do about that.
No, yeah.
Not until they become parents themselves. But you sort of, as the old Remington razor advert says, you liked it so much you bought the company, as it were.
Yes.
You were really taken by this. So on a personal level, what was taking you as a parent? What was grabbing you as a parent and thinking, I want my kids to experience this? What was the sort of selling point for you?
I think there were two things. The first thing was that I realized that there was far more that I could do as a parent to help my children. Because I mean, every parent wants their children to be happy. Yeah. But I think that many parents don't know what they can do to help their children be happy. And I certainly didn't. And so it really opened up a new world to me, because I realized that actually every day there were ways in which I could have an enormous influence on my children and on their future happiness and on the people that they would become, the adults that they would become. And I think I also realized that every school has, in fact, every environment you put a child in, I think, is forming that child. It's not something, because I think sometimes when people hear about our school, that the reaction is often, oh, that's very nice. This idea of formation, it's a really good add-on. It's like some schools have golf courses and so on, and you've got formation. That's nice. And I think the reality is that every school has formation, but the question is what formation.
Yeah, and you're going to do it consciously
towards exactly
purpose with an agreed contract around
that.
Or are you going to do it in a hidden way and sort of accidental and all that sort of stuff?
Well, that's right. And I realized that if you don't intentionally help cultivate good habits, for example, then you run the risk of inadvertently reinforcing bad habits.
Yeah.
And I could so, and I just saw that with these schools, I thought, gosh, these schools are really going to help. They're going to help us as parents, but also they're going to help our children to be the best they can be.
Yeah. And it's an interesting statement that you said sort of early on in response to that question, was that one of the things that you were learning was how to help your children be happy. And again, that's an extraordinary statement. I think every parent recognizes that statement. So when my boy sort of went up to his mom and said, thank you for my school on Monday, my heart just opened up completely. And I was just absolutely over the moon. It's the idea that he's happy. And I think every parent wants that's what they want. And then, but somehow something happens then when they go to school and you sort of go, I want them to be happy, but, and what does that but mean? And why should it be there just because your kid has gone to school? Surely that should still be the most fundamental experience for them in a school environment, that they are happy, that they're experiencing love, that they're experiencing whole growth, all of these things that, we want for our kids as parents. And how is it that the conversation that you and I are having isn't just a normal conversation to have with every single school? Because I think it should be. I think these are the types of conversations that absolutely should be happening all through, that are, for me, child-centric conversations. What is the core of that child in front of me? Sort of their emotional, spiritual, relational, educational health. That's for me what we're talking about, and it's lovely to be talking to you about it, but in one sense it's also very odd that it's such a rare conversation to have in modern educational settings. How did that happen? How did we get to the point where it seems like an odd thing to be talking about?
I don't know. I wonder if it's because I've wondered the same thing myself, but I think that schools can sometimes, I'm not sure how to put this tactfully, but I think that happiness can be hard won in a way. And I've always felt myself, I'm not a psychologically trained, but that aiming at happiness as an end in itself may not be the best way of achieving happiness. And I've always operated on the principle that one should aim at that self-giving we were talking about, and that happiness is almost a byproduct rather than the objective. And I think that it's very easy for a school to fall into the trap of thinking, well, our number one objective is for the pupils to be, if you like, immediately happy, almost immediate gratification, so that what they're doing is fun and that they don't do anything hard. But I would think that probably isn't a good route to happiness. And I think the road to happiness is probably involves doing things that you don't want to do and overcoming difficulties and everything else. So whether it's because of that, I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting because yes, it's right. You're absolutely right that the core of happiness is self-esteem, and self-esteem comes from doing esteemable things, and esteemable things are those things that we find personally challenging. That's
Right.
bottom line here. So facing up to one's fears and so for example, doing the right thing, even though it's going to have a negative impact upon yourself, is a great way to get self-esteem. So putting your hand up, being honest, even though you know you're going to get in trouble. That's how you get happiness. It really is. Sort of happiness is, as we say in my business, it's an inside job. It's not something that comes from outside or because of approval from somebody else. So those are all important things, but it does start with self and understanding self-esteem and service. All of these things I'm constantly in the work that I'm doing with my patients, teaching them about volunteering and selfless acts. Acts of kindness that can't be reciprocated, for example, is another good way to feel happy and content and good self-esteem. And I teach people this stuff because this is, but it's interesting that this type of stuff is ultimately built into many sort of spiritual and religious organizations and practices. It's sort of stuff that's
I mean, it struck me a few years ago because I went to a conference of the International Boys' School Coalition, and there was a psychologist there. I think it was Tina Ray. I think she's retired now. I don't know if you know her, but she was speaking at the conference, and she was talking about how it was about adolescent mental health, and she was talking about how she helps adolescents to overcome mental health problems. And what really struck me was that all of the things she suggested, I don't think she used the word virtue, but they were all virtuous.
Yeah.
And she talked about gratitude and acts of random acts of kindness, if you like, or planned acts of kindness, but that wouldn't be reciprocated, and so on.
And these things are very much part of, in my field, they're very much part of what we call positive psychology approaches. People misunderstand positive psychology as just that you think nice things. It's not that at all. Positive psychology is the capacity to transform through very specific activities, actions, and attitudes negative experience, so that you learn from them in the way that you were describing earlier on. And in spiritual practice, it's called spiritual learning. That things are placed, challenges are placed before you to help you grow, as opposed to the victim position, which is challenges are there to beat me down and fail. Whereas, in a sort of positive psychology approach, challenges are there because they're learning opportunities for self-growth. And these things, I think, and I've been talking a lot about them during this time, which is the pandemic, because we know that, we know the figures, the numbers of depressed people have doubled, numbers of people who are anxious have doubled. We also know, for example, suicides are on the rise amongst men, particularly with the facing of sort of loss of jobs and all that sort of stuff. And we also know that our mental health services were already stretched prior to it, and that they haven't got a hope in hell of coping at this point. So we have to have other approaches. And this is one of the core approaches that I've been advocating. Is this sort of understanding of either, you want to call it a spiritual approach, or you'd like to call it a positive psychology approach. It doesn't really matter. But it seems to me that, you're offering your boys something very, very powerful, particularly at times like this, and a force for good in their lives. But actually, it's going to have a broader impact in terms of how they then transmit that message outside of the school, which I guess is also part of how you would see your mission, is how they carry that message with them as humans.
Yes. Yeah,
I've got a few questions. That's why I've been looking at my phone. Jennifer one of my team has been sending a few questions, which is people who are tuning in. So mind if I just give them to you and we can sort of field them and then just say, you don't have to come up with anything clever about this. It's just thoughts that people are having, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on them. So here's one question that somebody's interested in. How has or will, do you think, your role as headmaster, and I guess as a human being, all-round good guy, change because of the pandemic? So how has it changed? How much do you think it will change? I suppose let's narrow it down to your role as educator, teacher, and headmaster. Sort of what's changed about your role, particularly in the context that you're working?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it's changed fundamentally. I think the circumstances have undoubtedly changed, but it may well be that we have more pastoral work to do than before. But I mean, there are always things going on in children's lives, even without pandemics. So it's made it's going to make day-to-day life a lot more difficult in a school. But I don't feel it's a fundamental. I don't think it'll lead to a fundamental change in our roles as teachers.
Right. And the second question follows on from that. And do you have advice for other sort of educationalists, other teachers and other headmasters around their students returning from lockdown? Would you sort of give advice?
It's very difficult.
On the spot, isn't it? I've suddenly made you Chief Education Officer for the UK. Here you go, Robert. This is your opportunity.
I mean, I suppose we haven't. Tomorrow will be the first test when we get a good number of pupils back, and then Friday even more so. I suppose the approach we're taking is we are trying to strike a balance, and because one of the things, I think one of the big challenges, and not just for schools, but I guess all over, is that there's such a range of perceptions of the pandemic.
Yeah.
There are some people who will, one end of the spectrum, you've got people who say, well, it's nothing at all. This is all ridiculous. And then at the other end, you're people. Some people are absolutely terrified. And so I think that we do have a role to play in trying to help these children who will come from families who represent that whole spectrum of views and perceptions of the pandemic, to try and give some perspective and balance. And so the attitude we will take is that we have this is a call to responsibility. It's a call for us for us all to behave in a way for the sake of others. Because I suppose another dimension to this is that certainly the pupils at school, by all accounts, the risk to them is very, very low indeed. But so on the one hand, we want them to be responsible and to think, well, we've got to act in a certain way for the sake of others. But at the same time, to keep things in perspective and not be terrified by this. And that's one of the reasons why I'm quite relieved we're not wearing masks routinely, because and that may change, and the guidelines seem very sensible, and if there is if we go to tier 1 and we have to wear masks and so on, that's that's fine. I can see the rationale, but I'm quite glad that we're not going to have masks all the time in schools, because I think that can actually add to the feeling of anxiety and stress and everything else. So that's just my view.
It's probably unnecessary when it comes to children, because yes, children can get infected, but it's tiny, the number of children who have any complications from this virus, and it's only really children who have other conditions and if your child has this other condition, you already know. It's not going to be surprised. You're not going to be surprised by it, and your health professionals will already let you know, and you would already have mitigation factors in place for your child to make sure that they remain safe and protected. I guess if you had any children in your school who fitted that category, you would have specialist mitigation procedures in place for them already. So we're not stumbling around in the dark on that one. Also, I mean, I guess partly because I want to be a bit educational in the conversation as well, is to just sort of also make the point that the evidence is indicating that children are not cross-infecting as much as adults are cross-infecting. Cross-infection is when somebody has it and even are not, or they have it on them, on their system, or they may be asymptomatic and then they infect other people. But it seems that the rates with children is much lower as well, which is surprising because generally children pick up everything and infect everyone. So if one child gets ringworm in a school, everybody's going to have it, and every single family in that school will have it within a week, you know. But this virus is just not acting in that way. It's quite odd in that sense that children are in their own little bubble. It's only as they get older that we begin to sort of be concerned about those things. So I think you're right, absolutely right, that it's not necessary. And that the adults around those children also can take heart from that, that the professionals working with those children can take heart that they're not really at risk. It's not the same as working in a care home by any stretch of the imagination, where, you know, personal protective equipment would be absolutely essential for yourself as a professional. So it's good to hear you say that. I've got a couple more questions, if that's right, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. This one I think you've already answered, but I'll give you the opportunity to add it again. It may be from somebody who didn't hear your original answer, but will you be adding any specific mental health components into the curriculum as a response to the virus and the lockdown and stuff like that?
Well, we already have quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's something we are increasing, but we were planning to increase it even before the pandemic. So I wouldn't say that we're doing it as a result of the pandemic. It's really just because it's becoming, it appears to be becoming more and more of a problem, as I say, even before this. But
so what other things are you doing then around mental health specifically in terms of within the curriculum and so on?
Well, I think that you know, one thing is the overlap between what we're doing in terms of personal development, which does overlap with as you say, lots of positive psychology. I think that, and that's something which everybody in the school is getting. It's not targeted at particular individuals, although we do try and personalize the delivery. But we are also getting, we're having some colleagues trained up as mental health first aiders. And as I say, that was something we decided to do, and in fact we've been delayed by the lockdown, unfortunately. But so we're pushing ahead with that. And I think we will need to be more vigilant than ever in spotting signs with pupils. You know, just keeping an eye on them. But as I said earlier, we're not going to go back to school expecting or giving the pupils the impression that we expect them all to be traumatized. My guess is that some of them would have been absolutely fine, and that some of them would have had a really, really hard time. And I think that depends on their personal circumstances. And
that's my experience as a mental health.
Yeah.
I think the vast majority of children, to be honest, because this virus isn't affecting them in the same way that it's affecting older adults, are not particularly traumatized by it. They're not particularly fearful about it. But it's more about the circumstances of the important adults around them. And the effects of that. And, you know, there are a cohort of children which you're not really working with that are in things like pupil referral units, which are, you know, the figures at the moment are disastrous. You know, I think only 5% of children in PRUs actually turned up, even though they've been open all the way through. But only 5% of them have actually attended, which is such a disaster. So
Yeah.
that cohort of children, is at a significant risk. And there are children, because we know, for example, things like domestic violence has rocketed, and drinking has rocketed as well. So in families where, and what seems to have happened is this, that families that were at risk are now well into the dangerous behaviours, and that line has just shifted. If you had, I presume if you had any of those families like that, you'd have known about them anyway, and sort of the relevant services would be involved and sort of incorporated. But I think my experience is, in general, unless there were specific risk factors like that kids have actually, they're okay around this stuff. The lockdown was actually for most kids quite pleasant. That they got to spend, particularly if they were younger, they got to spend time with mum and dad, and that was great. School holidays, the summer holidays were boring. They went on too long because you'd had the lockdown, and now that they're getting the opportunity to go back to school, they're really embracing it. So I'm with you. I wouldn't expect huge problems, but we know that those children that were at risk are, been pushed over the edge. But that was sort of there anyway. There are specific things, and I'm interested in looking at some other specific things maybe with you in the conversation. I want to finish off the questions that I've been getting from the public first, so that I make sure I'm doing my job properly and people don't get annoyed with me. It's not just all about me. Are there, in terms of your relationship with parents, you have a unique engagement with parents. Now, I guess parents are affected by the pandemic much more in some ways than the children. So are you predicting that your work with parents will change, or has it changed as a result of the pandemic? What's going on there in terms of that relationship?
I'm not anticipating it'll change particularly. I mean, we have a very good relationship with parents. I mean, I think we have a lot of trust, which is great, and we want to keep that. And so we communicate very openly with parents.
Are you finding them more anxious, or having to reassure them a bit more, or sort of they just all remain very level-headed in your experience?
I think for the most part they seem to me to be very level-headed. I mean, in March there was a certain amount of anxiety, which I think was very understandable at the time, and there were parents who, and I think with good reason, on the basis of the information that was available, withdrew their children for a time, perhaps because of vulnerable people in the household and so on. I've been worried for a time that we might have parents who decided, not to send their children back to school, because we've been, through our associations and so on. I know that this is happening in some schools, but so far we haven't had anybody expressing any specific concerns about their son returning to school, which is great. A few of them have fallen foul of quarantine. They'll be a bit late coming back, but that's, we can deal with that. But nobody has said we're not coming back. Nobody has even said, oh, can you confirm this aspect of the measures you're taking? I mean, I have given them detail on what we are doing, and it may be when we go back.
Unusual as a school in that, in terms of your conversations with other schools, do you think that's unusual, or do you think that's fairly much standard?
I don't know. I mean, schools seem to vary so much. I mean, we do belong to various associations, and so there's a very helpful forum in one particular association where we all share what's going on, and so I do know that. It seems to vary a lot. So I would guess there are schools where there's quite a bit of concern.
Yeah.
And so far,
I'm wondering if the sort of confidence that the parents have in your school is a reflection of the closeness of the relationship that you have and the way that you sort of buddy up with parents, so that they're very much an integral part of it. So they're almost like part of the investment board, aren't they? You know, sort of.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that I think we do have their trust. I think they certainly trust that you know we'll want to do what's best, and they will quite rightly challenge us if they, you know, feel that there are things we could do better. And it may be that once we go back, parents will think, or some parents may get in touch and say, well, you know, we really think, you know, have you considered doing this or that? But I mean, I think we're going to have to learn as we go through this as well, because it's completely new, and we'll have to see how things run really, and be flexible. And if things aren't working, we'll have to change them.
Of course. And final question from the public. I'm sorry I don't have the names of people who've asked these questions. My apologies, but you know who you are, and I hope I'm asking questions in a way that's helpful. Do you have advice for parents whose children are remaining at home and need homeschooling or remote learning? It's not an experience you're having at the moment, but sort of any thoughts about that in terms of?
Well, yes. I mean, I know it can be very challenging, because, of course, that was a situation we were in last term, and I know that there were a range of experiences that families had with remote learning. I mean, just going by the feedback we've had from parents, I think that routine is really important.
Yeah.
I think having some kind of timetable where children get up at a set time, and I think it can be quite intense, and I think trying to mirror a school day completely is probably not a good idea.
I think it's insane to try and mirror a
Yeah.
school day.
Yeah.
Every parent I've worked with, I said, don't even attempt to do that at all.
I mean, I think in a home situation, if you have a timetable, I think the important thing is having that timetable and sticking to it. And I think if you do that, you can get through a lot more in less time than a school can. Yeah. And have some sanity as well. I mean, I suppose one thing we always emphasize to the boys here is to try and get them to do what they're supposed to be doing at the right time, because we find that often boys will they won't do what they're supposed to be doing, but they'll spend all their time worrying because they haven't done it. So they're stressed, they're not achieving.
I haven't changed.
Yeah.
Still, I need to come to your school and learn. I'm still like, I spend most of my time worrying about the things I should have been doing, rather than just getting.
I struggle with it myself, but.
Correct. That's great. A fantastic advice. But let's also talk a little bit about that other aspect, because this is what your school, as well as, you know, being good academically and having high quality and high standards around this. One of the things that one of the core missions, if you like, is to look at that broader stuff that school environment offers, and to be thoughtful about that. So thinking about those kids who might have to stay at home, and not that staying at home is a bad option, but are then going to miss out on the sort of those broader aspects of the socialization, the non-educational contact with children. What do you think as schools, educational sector in general, might be able to offer in that sense? Because for me, I think one of the things I've been saying to the press as I've been interviewed about this is that a lot of what's important about school is not what happens in the classroom, but it's also the stuff that happens outside of it, and the developmental opportunities that are available to children because of being in complex social groups that are safe and sort of thoughtful. I mean, you know, as a health professional, I'm pretty much convinced we've got this for the next couple of years. This is not going away. We're going to be coming in and out of measures that are sort of more or less like lockdown or less like et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's quite an important issue. Any thoughts that you might have around how we might be able to sort of support those children and those families that remain a little bit more isolated, if you like?
Mm. Uh,
That's putting
yeah,
you on the spot, Robert. I mean,
yeah.
it's an unfair question. It's just something that's occurring to me, and I've been thinking.
But it is a challenge. I mean, I suppose the only thing I can think of is that I mean, I would have thought the most important thing is the socialization.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously things like sport. If you know if you can't leave the house, then that's not really going to be
Yeah.
practical. But I think that socialization with others, with their peers, is really important. And I think creating some kind of space for that, but without. I mean, I was a bit wary of smartphones for children because I just think it's so easy for them to get out of control. I mean, they seem to be designed to addict. But I mean, having said that, I mean, I know that, I mean, and again, as a school, we do quite a lot to try and help parents, well, to help the boys to control their smartphones. It doesn't control them if they have one. But I think this is a bit different, and I think the need for socialization outweighs the other issues, and so we're encouraging boys to stay in touch. But again, I think if there's a way of exerting some control over that, so that it's not boys being in a WhatsApp group and receiving thousands of messages in the early hours of the morning, but where they have a set time where, right, you know, go and join that WhatsApp group or whatever with your friends.
What's coming to mind is a couple of things. I'm thinking, like, there's this app called House Party, which I've not used because I'm far too old for it, and people would be horrified if I turned up. But you know, it's apparently an app where you can do fun socializing type stuff. Really how it works. And then another thing I'm thinking of is this thing called the Big White Wall, which is maybe closer to what you're talking about. The Big White Wall is this very interesting, it's a mental health space actually, rather than anything else, but it's sort of modeled on things like Facebook and these social media spaces, and actually it's monitored, loosely monitored. But the core of it is to allow people who have significant mood disorders to socialize in an online way and support each other. It's called peer-to-peer support, and it's a very powerful tool. And then they have these wall monitors, I think they're called, who just check that content is safe and that people, you know, are safe on it. And it's very light touch. They are trained to do it, but it's very light touch, and any signs of any problems, they can sort of step in and help. And it's responses like that I'm beginning to think about, because I think that we're going to be in this situation for some time to come. You know, and I sort of I'm a great advert. Let's get kids back to school, but what about those ones that can't, or whose parents just won't allow it to happen? And sort of how do we manage that? And also, how do we build in, I think, resilience into these social networks so that there's continuity if we then move into sort of level 1 and shutting down schools again, and all, how do we sort of maintain then the continuity in the relationship so that they're not broken? And I mean, I think that so there's some quite important maybe pieces of work that people need to think about. And I'm with you. I think that this pandemic, not just with smartphones, but it shifted our relationship to the online space radically. And we're not going backwards anymore. We're not going to go back to the way it was. There are just certain changes that have taken place that are permanent now, and that maybe would have taken another 10 years. But you know, the fact that you and I are sitting here like this and doing this and sort of talking in this way. I had a studio before this, and people physically came into the studio with me. And now that's not happening. And actually, it's been quite a positive thing in some ways, because I had this really interesting ex-police officer on last week who's in Australia. Last week, the week before, and we were talking about the police and PTSD and stuff like that, and that would never have happened before. And it's fantastic. So there's been some real beneficial shifts. On that note, we're coming to the end of the show. It may be too early to say, for you, and you're not a futurologist, but do you see sort of from this now the positive learning, the positive changes from the pandemic, as we're still in it, but in terms of how it's impacting upon you as a human being, your family, your children, the kids that come to your school, the school environment that you're in? Sort of broad question there about what are the positive takeouts from this experience? What's the transformations that are taking place?
No, I mean, I can definitely see positives. So I think many of them have to do with technology, and really similar to what you were saying about using Zoom. Because I mean, to give you some practical examples, I mean, because we have a tutorial system, which I told you about before, where every boy has a tutor that he meets with on a one-to-one basis. The tutor is also the main point of contact between parents and the school. So the tutor meets with parents, and they'll talk. You know, it's not like a conventional parents-teacher meeting where we have those as well, but it's more talking about that particular boy as a human being, what are his strengths and weaknesses, how can we help him, to you know, working together, what can we do? And it can be very difficult to get parents to come to those meetings because they're busy. It's not one meeting, or sorry, it's not you know, like a meeting where they're meeting all the teachers. And so we're going to be using or offering Zoom meetings as well. And we also, I mean, if there are two parents, we like to have both parents, because I think that's actually far more powerful than speaking to just one. And I think this will enable us to have far more meetings with both parents. It may be that one will come live and we'll have the other one on Zoom, or we'll have them both on Zoom. So I think there are various things like that. And also, I suppose almost we've had to up our game in terms of producing resources. So last term, we all had to become more savvy with using technology, and most of us were making videos every day, and I think this will improve our teaching, and it will certainly improve the resources that we're able to provide for pupils. And I'm hoping that because of that, it will help in some indirect way, that it will help them to acquire more independence in their learning. Because I feel if we are providing better resources, then they'll be able to do a bit more on their own, and perhaps be a bit less reliant on being in the classroom. So, for example, like probably most schools, we used Google Classroom last term as the framework for our teaching, and we're going to stick with it because now we're back. We can't see any reason not to.
Right.
We're going to record some of our classes. You know, if there are pupils quarantining or off, we'll if we can, we'll record them. We'll post them up there. But of course, that also means that pupils who were in the lesson can then look at things again. So I think lots of things will improve.
Yeah, I'm wondering also about, so one of the things that has definitely happened, only happened for me as a human being, particularly early on in the sort of pandemic, but still now, is it got me to think about what actually is important in my life. And I sort of stopped asking myself that question, and maybe the shock of the pandemic, but also the shutdown and the lockdown and stuff like that. And, you know, so I really got to grips with, well, you know, what are my core values? What are really important? And a lot of people have given me that sort of feedback in their life as well. And we have this interesting phenomenon at the moment of many successful relationships have started in the lockdown. Very odd thing that we were predicting, as we were seeing out of China, for example, a lot more divorces, which I'm sure will happen, but also there's a lot of new relationships as people have really focused on that. And thinking about your core mission as a school, which is to, you know, provide high quality education and curriculum, etc., but also to look at the whole of that child. I'm wondering about the impact upon that as well, in terms of heightening that. and adding value to what you're doing in terms of, the impact on the teachers coming in, the parents, and maybe even the kids themselves.
I mean, I hope it will. I mean, I think it's always good to. I think often we tend not to think enough about those big questions.
Yeah.
I think if it can help people to think a little bit more about the person they want to be, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. Well, Robert, it's been amazing to have you on. It's not, I have to say, it's not the conversation I expected, even though I talked to you a little bit. I sort of really wasn't, expecting this type of conversation about personal growth and development. And it's been, quite extraordinary to talk to you about that. It's your warmth and your compassion has come across really, really strongly, and also your political savvy at avoiding some of the questions that I gave you.
Thank you for having me on.
No, it's just been fantastic to have you on. It might be nice to think about in a couple of months' time, maybe catching up and seeing how things have been going at the school, and sort of seeing how this ongoing situation, like I say, it's going to be a few years yet before it resolves itself in any way, in any meaningful way, and it might be interesting to catch up with you at that point. In the meantime, I mean, I think that the takeaway I have from it, and I'm hoping that other people get, not just that you've got a great school, without a doubt you have, but a real sort of reaffirmation of the sensibleness of the education system and the teachers within it, that we've got safe hands there for our kids, and we can really trust those education professionals to have thought about this stuff and to provide for our kids a really welcoming environment and a fun environment and a loving environment that they're going to go back into school, and very much a child-centered environment. It's really, really lovely to hear it. So thanks for coming on. Really, really lovely to see you. We're going to leave it there, folks. Robert, don't go anywhere. We're going to disappear from the screen, but you stay with myself and James.
Okay.
Thanks to everybody who's had questions. This will be available, so if you're watching this outside of our live broadcast and you still want to, you have some burning questions that or thoughts that you want to share with us, do put them in the comments. We'll pick them up during the week. Drop me a message on WhatsApp. If you've got questions for Robert, I'll pass them on. Robert, if somebody is interested in getting to know more about your school, how do they do that? Is there a website that they can?
Yeah, the best thing is to start with the website. It's www.thecedarschool.org.uk, and then just drop us an email or phone, and we can arrange a visit or a phone call.
Brilliant. Really good to have you on. I want to say good night to everybody for now, and I'll catch up with everybody again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.